What do you make of, 2020, like massive voter turnout, helped by rightfully a lot of the things that were implemented in, under COVID, which was like, you could vote early, you could vote by, dropping off your ballot at a drop box. Other people can send in your ballot for you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the stuff that like continues in states, blue states, but not so much in red states. How do you think that's impacting, or what have you seen that impacting the midterm elections?
Well, y'all were just talking about Texas a minute ago, and Texas is a great example of that, because Texas during the pandemic actually made it really easy for people to vote. You saw like what the Democratic clerk in Houston did, doing drive-through voting. You could pull up in a tent. And then what happened is, when people saw how many people voted in Texas, which was more people than have ever voted in Texas, and how many Democrats came out, and they were thinking about what's on the ballot this year, the governor's race, especially, no state rolled back voting access more than Texas. Now, there was a story just the other day about the biggest college campus in Texas, one of the biggest college campuses in the country. They used to have one early voting location on the campus for tens of thousands of kids who would go to vote for the whole early voting period. The students there were pushing to add another one. So what did Texas do? They got rid of the first one. There's no early voting location on the entire campus. So these sorts of things aren't just happening in Texas. Some states have done the right thing, and those tend to be states or counties that are run by Democrats and have left those options in place to make it easier for people to vote. But a lot of states have made it harder. And when we think about a lot of these key states, y'all have been talking about Georgia a lot, and voter suppression is alive and well in Georgia, unfortunately.
Tom, do you think, when we look at the razor thin margins, in terms of the House and the Senate in 2020, what do you predict the efficacy to be of these voter suppression efforts going into midterms? Like, how fucked are we, Tom? I'm trying to be all professional.
That's the question I ask myself every
North
morning.
Carolina did some serious rejiggering of their districts.
Yep.
And Florida too.
Yeah.
Which,
I mean, the fact is that this year was, quote, supposed to be a red wave election year for Republicans, because it's a midterm election, because the party that's not in the White House usually wins by a really wide margin. And then you add on top of that gerrymandering that Roy mentioned, which, a lot of people say, well, it wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. Well, what we thought it would be is not the best metric that we should be judging things against these days. Voter suppression has gotten worse in many places. And so you have all those factors. And on the other hand, you have that, look, the Republican Party is so extreme at this point. They've gone so far to the point where they really don't care about appealing to most American voters. And that's definitely having an impact, because if you look at the polling, if you look at all the indicators, Republicans should be running away with this based on all those structural advantages that they've put in place over the last decade, going back especially to 2014. And they're not. Democrats are leading in the generic ballot polls, narrow margin, but leading. When you look at these key races, when you look at the Senate races in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and North Carolina, Ohio even, we're talking about now, Democrats legitimately can win all these races, but it's going to take really everything going exactly right. Whereas Republicans, their strategy isn't about, well, how do we appeal to swing voters? How do we get our base out? It's literally, how do we keep the other side from coming out? And that's, to state the obvious, problematic.
Yeah, that's sort of what I think I was listening to Weigel, and he was like that, Dave Weigel from the Washington Post, and he was like that the Democrats kind of have to bat perfectly, especially in the House, to keep the House. Senate might be even almost easier. I mean, even Mitch McConnell's like, our candidates suck. Like, he's like very open about how the Senate might be lost. I just don't want JD Vance in the fucking Senate. And I don't want any of them there. Like, definitely not Dr. Oz, but that dude's going to lose. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do